Sehr verehrte Damen.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests. A warm welcome to this first podium of this day. The subject is age and aging society. Whenever one speaks about age, there are two traps one nearly always falls into. First, one is tempted to talk about figures, retirement age. There's billions of figures and statistics. And secondly, the other trap is that one would speak only about the failings, the deficits, the shortcomings of age. We probably won't avoid these two traps completely, but we will make great efforts not only to speak about figures or the failings and the disadvantages of age, but I will have to bore you with some figures just to describe the subject a little bit. About 1/5 of the Swiss population is over 65 today. In 2030, it'll be a quarter. And by 2050, we assume that 1/3 of the Swiss population will be older than 65. So what does this mean? What does this entail for the working world, for the health systems, the social insurance systems, and for society at large? The question is also, are we prepared for this? And that is what we would like to debate. We have a very interesting panel. I would like to welcome very warmly Angelina Fankhauser, who is co-chair of the Graue Panthers, that is, say, the demanding old senior citizens who really claim their rights. She was a national councillor for a long time, from 1983 to 1994, and also for a long time at the head of the organization that aids workers. Then Ruth Baumann-Hölzle, theologian. She is founder and co-chair of the Dialogue Ethics, that is the Interdisciplinary Institute for Ethics in Healthcare, and she deals mainly with decision-taking in the health system. For many years, she's also been a member of the National Ethics Committee in the area of health. Then Thomas Held, he is the director of the think tank of Swiss industry, which is called Avenir Suisse, the future of Switzerland. Then Urs Tanner on the right, or left from your side. He is managing partner at Top 50. Top 50 is a company that provides temps who are all over 50 years old. For a long time, he was managing director of Intersport Switzerland before that. Then Ludwig Gärtner on the extreme right, from your point of view. He is vice director of the Federal Social Insurance Office, and he's in charge of families, generation, and society. Now, before we enter the arena, I'd just like to draw your attention to the two other podia that will be taking place today. At 3:30, we will have Yes, We Can. That's on the United States, a very interesting podium. And then at 7 o'clock, A World Without Nuclear Weapons. Is that a utopia? Question mark. We have a very important and famous person who will be here, the Defense Minister, Mr. von and zu Gutenberg, the Federal Defense Minister of Germany. So that will be a very exciting panel as well. I broke a few ribs a few weeks ago, Mrs. Fankhauser, and for a few weeks I was walking around like the Michelin man, as if I was in a full-body plaster of Paris. And I suddenly thought, this is maybe what it's like when one's old or gets old. And you will say, well, that's the typical kind of response. One only thinks about the bad sides and disadvantages of being old. Well, I must say, it's different of what I thought when I was young. I thought I wouldn't have to work anymore. I'd be free, do what I want. And I now notice that you gradually get older. For 10 years, I am now officially old. I've been old for 10 years. Is it as of 65 that one is old? Yes, it's when you get your state pension that you are officially old. I was able to get it when I was 62. That has changed since then. I, of course, am benefiting from this old age pension, and I'm sure all other pensioners agree with me that is wonderful, but at the same time, there's also the public pressure believing that there are too many of us, we live too long, and we are too expensive. So it's not really the physical ailings that bother, it's the social pressure that is so negative. Well, it's very individual, depends on how fit you are. Sometimes your body is doing well and your head is completely gone. Well, I'd say that you have still both parts working perfectly well. I can tell you that even though I'm older, I am still fully occupied trying to fit everything into my day, going to fitness courses and trying to go to other courses. And I've always had the problem of deciding, do I do what I want to do or what I have to do? And I've decided in favor of doing what I feel like doing. So to use economic terminology, this is a great asset to be able to do what one likes when one's old. Thomas Held, over to you. I think all of us have this image of old age, of aging, of getting older, which is marked by our own experience. We have the image of our parents and grandparents in front of us. How do you see getting old? Perhaps one should put it under the heading of hope. My image is marked by my younger brother, who is a psychiatrist and specialized in old persons, in geriatrics. He's just written a book about the last part of the life of individuals. It's not really a medical work, it's nearly literary. And I read this book, and in reading, it came to me that one can only hope that one's mind remains very active and alive and young. This is what seemed to emerge as the most important aspect. So talking about getting old is of no use as long as your mind is no longer very active and alive. You lose your dignity in certain circumstances. It becomes very difficult. So the overriding feeling is that hope is hope. And also the worry that this dignity is lost. Yes, this really brings us right to the core of the subject, as Mrs. Fankhauser has just said. We know perfectly well that remaining very active is not just a matter of fate or destiny. It depends very much on how active one actually is. Mrs. Baumann-Hölzle, what is your image or your perception of aging or getting old? Mine has been marked very much by my parents, who were very committed as soon as they retired to looking after my children once a week, one day a week. And I've noticed that this relationship between the generations is something very precious, and they were, because of this good relationship with their grandchildren, able to accept more their help than my help. Last year, my father died, and he did not wish to go in for an operation which might have prolonged his life, and he wanted to decide himself how he wanted to die. And now, of course, I am spending a lot of time looking after my mother, who's in a very fragile phase and state, and I have to sandwich everything into a day's work, looking after my mother, my professional activities. So instead of looking after my children, I'm now looking after my mother. I've read somewhere, says the moderator, there's an article that is called From the Rocking Horse to the Rocking Chair. Is that the kind of situation you find yourself in? Mr. Turner, what do you see? What is your perception? Well, that I see it at two levels. I always felt that my grandparents were the only people who were old, and then suddenly I realized that I too was getting older and that I'm very soon on the threshold where I'll be termed an oldie. Both my parents are still alive. They're over 80, but they're in good health and very fit. In my professional activities, I have a lot of contacts with those who are on the threshold, those who are over 50, who are going through fundamental change. They've had a job for 30 years, worked every day, and then suddenly they reach this threshold where they have to find a new direction. This is a great challenge. This is also connected with this age threshold, this challenge of age. Over 50, am I still flexible to adjust? Can I embark on something new? Can I do something new? And this also has a very deep mark on one's psyche. It's very important psychologically, this turbulent time of change. Many well-tested, well-proven managers, I must admit, don't cope so well as others. Maybe this is a pre-stage of old age, and it's also very interesting to experience, to observe how other people cope with this change or don't cope with it. Some are just very vital, very energetic, and manage it very easily. So you think that old age starts at 50? Yes. At least something does change or start. Until one is 50, one thinks, oh, there's unlimited time left. And then as of 50, one suddenly realizes that it's limited, that time is limited. It's finite, and I become a little more selective. I did become a little more selective in what I wanted to devote my time to. And that is what I think is the perception of age and aging. Mr. Gärtner? My perception is very varied. Variegated. It's marked by what's happening in my family and in my neighborhood. There are people who have great physical difficulties when they're 50 or just around 50. Others are very fit. I, of course, hope that I will remain fit even when I get older, but it's not easy for everyone. It doesn't go without saying. This may be perhaps a question of fate. I feel old now, and I have for a week. A week ago, I had to run to catch a train, and I saw a young couple saying farewell to one another, and I nearly bumped into them. The lady took a step back, and her partner said, "Careful, there's an old man there." So that really cut me to the quick. There's a time for everyone when one realizes one's not 20 anymore. Mrs. Fankhauser, I read that you said somewhere that old age is the most important part of one's life because everything one does is for the last time. So everything you want to do has to be done then, otherwise it's too late. This does, however, contrast very much with the perception or the image that one has about age, which is that in old age you can't do anything anymore, no one is really happy anymore. Only Mrs. Giovanelli Blocher is really happy about old age. It is the happiness in old age. So how can you make the best of old age? In other societies, other cultures and civilizations, the image is much better of old age than here. It's a question how it is fabricated. Is it simply by looking at oneself in the mirror every morning? You see all your wrinkles and the additional wrinkles, or when you go to the doctors and see the other patients in the waiting room? Or is the image fabricated by the media in what you read in the newspapers, see on television? I actually see two pictures, the one portrayed in the media. And of course, it depends. Travel companies organize trips for young people. many old people feel that their age is the best because they no longer have to go to work, they feel relieved. That's part of the population. The executives, of course, another part of the population, feel that they've had to go cold turkey and they feel that they are deprived. But the image is like a puzzle. It's like a broken mirror. When you're 80, 85, 90, things change again. The image of old age that I have is one of solidarity and liberation. I don't think that we are here to debate the general fact of getting old and fragile and vulnerable. We all know, well, this image of rocking horse to rocking chair is a very good one. We all are aware of it. I think the point of this debate is to explore the fact that life expectancy is so much longer, and it is not longer life that is mainly independency. What Mrs. Fankhauser describes wouldn't be possible if these additional life years had not been gained through better technology, wealth, better standard of living, better food and nutrition. All of this compared with the good old times. I think this is the reason for our gathering here as a panel. Obviously, everyone gets old and dies at the end of the day. We are all mortal. We will all become vulnerable and fragile. That has always been the case ever since man has trod Earth. But the challenge before us is the fact that people no longer die on average when they are 60, which was the fact and the situation when old age pension schemes were introduced. Today, men and women usually die on average when they're 85, 86 years old. Mrs. Baumann? Well, it's a success story with a dark side. If we look at the studies, then I think all of us can hope for old age. There's much more freedom. We can enjoy life a lot. As Mrs. Fankhauser, a lot of older people show that and prove that our society is a much safer place and provides for better being, not just well-being, than in the past. That's one side. The other side, the dark side, I'd say, is the following. When you get older, you have to take stock. Whatever you've done in the past, you will continue, and what you have not done, you have to do. But one also has to realize that the poorer get sicker younger and die younger. The majority of the population is in a much better situation today. But on the dark side, we also have this demographic change. There's still a lot of potential for improvement. Despite everything that we've achieved, we still can improve on our standard of life and standard and quality of life for the older senior citizens. But the older we get, the more care we have to provide for, and who's going to pay for this, and who is going to take care of the older population? This is something we have to cope with. Okay, let's take this one point which will probably lead to some debate. What is old age retirement age? You said that you were able to retire when you were 62. It's rising, 63, 64, 65. Mr. Held has said that life expectancy has risen a lot in 30 or 40 years ago. Someone who retired at 50 perhaps had another 10 years of life expectancy. Today, this has changed completely. So can we still afford this economically, financially, to retire, to send people into retirement when they're 65? Or let me put it differently. Does the economy need older citizens, or do older people still need to work when they're older than 65?
Well, I think we have a problem when it comes to financing our old age insurance. And then we have what we call the third age, with retired people that are still physically fit. And the question is, what shall we do in that situation? Well, it's a good thing for the fact that we are much better trained and educated. That's good news, but it also reduces the years of active employment. And I think it's a reality for a third of men that they continue to work above the age of 65, albeit at a reduced pace. And I think this will continue further due to the demographic aging. If we don't shift the retirement age, the number of actively employed will be reduced, and this will make old-aged persons more interesting for employers. So you think that the retirement age will increase, but your former boss, Mr. Couchepin, didn't really accept that. Well, he came too early with that. Well, how are we going to organize that is the question. If we look at lifelong working, then we could also look at questions such as aging fairness in aging, because not everyone has the same level of education. Those who are well educated have a better chance to be successful at a higher age. Those who are in a less favorable condition will have to work harder. So the question is, to what extent can we find strike a balance between the different population segments with different opportunities? Well, first of all, there has to be a balance. We have to strike a balance between the age groups and age brackets. Here on the panel, we don't really have a representative of the younger generation, because the generation among the old is carried out by the old. I am an old person as well, statistically speaking. So those who will have to pay for it by paying higher contributions, more taxes, value-added tax, they are usually not participating in the discussion. And the question about the retirement age, and of course your questions are pertinent, Mrs. Baumann, but the core of this discussion is that if there is no adjustment to this longer life expectancy, a gradual one, an incremental one, whatever we could do, this would mean that this longer life will have to be paid by the active employed population. There's no way around it. And if we could say, well, work between 30 and 55 or 60, whether it's good or bad to work for 30 years and then 30 years without work, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. But it's not enough. And if you look at the social insurance schemes, they're highly indebted and they're very high obligations for payment. In Switzerland, we are relatively well off, but the other European countries have highly indebted social insurance schemes, and nobody can tell how these debts will be paid back. Now, Mrs. Fankhauser, of course, doesn't agree. I know, Ms. Held, it is your mandate to keep talking about the retirement age. Maybe one day you will have a majority in the population, but you will probably have to wait very long for the population to say yes to your demands. Because the question of ability to age, to work, is linked to the availability of jobs. Right now, it's difficult to place or integrate people in the labor market at the age of 50 when they lose their jobs. Now, if you are going to increase the retirement age, and this will make it difficult to place these people, with the exception of some managers in the postal services of Switzerland. I agree with Mrs. Hölzle that it's a question of fairness also that we have to look at when it comes to discussing the retirement age. Statistically speaking, if you haven't got a full education, you've worked harder, you've earned less, and you have a reduced life expectancy. The workers, the blue-collar workers, are those who will lose out in this game. My generation pre-financed the old age pension scheme for its own parents, and the insurance scheme did survive. We've had zero capital in the beginning, but we financed those social insurance schemes. We're all paying value-added tax, not just the young, and it's a large amount. In all crises, the old age persons have continued to consume and therefore have stabilized consumption. So we are economic players as well. Mr. Held is always painting a bleak picture and tells the young people that they should not be happy with the old generation. And I know a lot of young people who are very happy with the old age generation. Well, Mr. Gärtner knows more about statistics than I do. And maybe he can come in on that. But let me say something about the majority, that one has to wait for a long time for that majority. I agree with you, Mrs. Fankhauser. And that is the enormous problem we are faced with in Switzerland and in Europe at large. It's what has happened with Mr. Couchepin, the former minister. The politicians don't want to deal with this issue because people who discuss this issue, as we've seen it in the health reform discussions, will be punished as a politician and will be elected out of office. Look at the figures. Look at the statistics. It is clear that the scheme will be underfinanced. We know exactly how many people will be in the older generation. The baby boomers are now retiring. I am part of this generation as well. And with the existing systems, we cannot finance this. Mr. Gärtner, when will we hit the wall with these systems? Well, the wall is kind of elastic, but it will be there. No doubt, in old age pension systems, we will be in the red figures, but we have a fund which, thanks to the economic development and migration, is well funded, so we can use that fund. And I expect that in 2015, 60 or 70, we will have about 70% of the annual expenses. And then, if we don't find a solution, then we will hit the wall. But let me say something else. The main question is, how can we regulate the retirement age? Should it be just by age? What about the professional career? Could that be factored in? I think that needs to be discussed. But there is another solidarity effect, and I would like to praise the young people here. In my job, I hire a lot of young people, and they have to be so well educated and trained to get a job. And they, I think, make their contributions. And I think we have to do the same thing. It is also a moral commitment for myself. I have to make my own contribution. And let me say, yes, we can. I agree with Mr. Held in his analysis. with a few minor points where I don't agree, but I think, yes, we can. The 11th revision of the old age pension scheme is not finished yet, but economically speaking, we have done relatively well, but the political decisions will have to be made as well. Can I say something concerning the optimism? Well, in my heart, I am really an optimist. I am very confident because we could say we have no problems with the age. As you said, it is a tremendous potential. It is a gift for humanity, but we have a problem with the adjustment of some insurance issues which were, or limits in the insurance issues that were fixed in the 19th century. 1868, Bismarck invented the age of 65. If somebody came here from Mars and he would say, why 65? They're all fit, they're traveling, they're very active. Why is it that they retire at the age of 65? It could be 67 or 68, which would really change the problem tremendously. Nobody speaks about 75 or any other higher age. But if you then just make this proposal, and now I'm getting pessimist, if I may, if you propose a smallest change, a necessary change, the way we see it in view of the conversion rate for the second pillar of our social security system, if we propose a minor change, then people are outraged, and there's tremendous resistance. Mrs. Fankhauser, it is your movement that blocks this politically. Well, that's direct democracy. Mr. Tano, please. Well, I try to look at it from the economic point of view. Politicians discuss a lot, and it takes a long time for things to change. And the economy, business will help here, but we will not have enough people able to work. So more elderly people will have to work. They will make money, and they will contribute to the insurance fund. So the economy will definitely make a contribution here and help the system survive. And that will accelerate this development. But when will it start? When people start to rethink, when companies start to understand that they need to have a good mix between young and old. And you say that's not the case yet. It's not the case yet, not to a large enough extent. Mrs. Baumann, we seem to agree that we have more liberties at a higher age, but we also have more responsibilities. And if young and old people are equal, have equal rights, and I think they should have equal rights, then we should also have the equal responsibilities. And also the same and similar commitments to make a contribution of solidarity in this society. Now, what I don't like about what you say is that old people will have an active role to play when they are needed, but it's not labor as such. And this goes to show what we have to do for people not to work too hard so that they get burned out in the old age, that they like to work at a higher age as well. If I like to work, and if work is a privilege for me, and that's the way it's going to be even more in the future, then we have to have jobs that motivate people to be happy in their jobs. Can I respond to that? I do distinguish between work and work. There are people who've had to work very hard, and then they were just too tired in the end. They're still 65-year-old craftsmen who should be retired because their body has suffered too much in the hard work. Others, however, can still work at the age of 70. It's relative. And they should be allowed to work at that higher age as well. But I have made my decision not having to stop to work. I said, at 50, I want to build or have several pillars of my work so that I can decide what to do. Well, Mr. Tanner, I agree with that. I said it in the beginning. That's the best thing to do. It's also a good objective, but then there's the question of destiny. You have to be able to do it, and there are changes because of destiny. And in the case of such changes of destiny, there should be a social network available. But otherwise, we should not be based on the ideas of manufacturing industry of the 19th century or the 50s or 60s of the last century. You talked about craftsmen. People talk about the construction industry. Look at the capital equipment that is used, how work has changed, that things are done by machines, jobs, scheduling, computer knowledge, all this has become more important in these tough blue-collar works. I'm not saying that those blue-collar jobs are not hard jobs, tough jobs, but go to a construction site. It's changed a lot. Look what has happened over the past 10 years. That type of work. Otherwise, it would not be possible to be so productive the way we were. I'm not saying that this hasn't happened, but then something else. Youth unemployment is higher than unemployment in the higher age brackets. That is a fact. And it also means that we have unequal treatment at the expense of the younger generations. Yes, but we have to be careful. When shifting the paid work upward, the volunteer work that is done for free will be displaced. And the question is, who will work in the civil society, those jobs, or those people taking care of others? And we do have a problem of care in our society. Children's nursing, nursing for the old, because nobody wants to take over those nursing jobs, and also because these jobs are not paid well. Now, I'd like to make an experiment here. Could I ask you in the audience, who of you would want to work beyond the currently valid retirement age? Or those who have retired already, who would have liked to work beyond the retirement age? Please show. Okay. And any objections? Who is happy to retire or be able to retire at the ordinary retirement age? Thank you very much. Well, Mrs. Fankhauser, we've had a clear majority. Now, when you speak, I get the feeling that everyone's very happy to be retired at 63, 64. And I think the majority of the people don't agree with that. They would like to work longer. Yes, I agree with that. But we have to define work. Since I've been retired, I may be working as much as before, but differently. It's no longer paid, and I'm self-determined, and I have a basic income which is secured. But people retire because they have enough, because they are no longer desired, they're no longer in want. And if Mr. Held wants to achieve his objective, then I think he should change his strategy and create interesting jobs for elderly people. Then I think the whole thing will happen automatically. But Mr. Tanner said that the economy will regulate this automatically. Well, economy will do that for the managers, but not for the sales assistants and other lower paid jobs. Well, yes, I do have the figures, but we cannot, we shouldn't talk about working 100 or 120% until the age of 70. Nobody would advocate that. Now, I would have shown up as well. I would like to work as well beyond the age of 65, but not 100%. Maybe I could do something totally different, but I would like to continue to work. Okay, fine. Let's have a small poll now here on the panel, or a vote. Mrs. Fankhauser, Mr. Held said it, right now you can't get a political majority for the increase of the retirement age. My question is, will we have this majority in 2020 with the accompanying measures and with job offers by the economy? Will we have the higher retirement age in 2020? Those who say yes, please show. Will we have that situation in 2020 with a higher retirement age? The problem is not the age limit. It's the accompanying measures, the parallel measures that you mentioned. The vote will be on the age limit and not the accompanying measures. And the accompanying measures are what counts. Mr. Gärtner believes it will be this way, Mrs. Baumann as well. Mr. Held is skeptical. I'm skeptical because the accompanying measures are not guaranteed. What are we talking about? It will mean higher pensions, further cushioning of the social system, but that will not happen because it's not possible, economically speaking. We have a political gridlock. What makes me almost angry in this discussion, yeah, I sometimes get angry, is that we are discussing a very minor point. The major point, the major challenge, ladies and gentlemen, is what you see here in Davos. When you walk out of the station, there's a big poster, Resilient India. Youth and talent. You look at this, and you see those Indian buses in Davos. Youth and talent, that is the challenge of the world. It's not a question of whether we are an aging society. That's fine. The question is, are we an old society as well? Do we have enough innovation? Are we entrepreneurial enough? Are we ready to take risks in that aging experiment? That is our major challenge around the world. Otherwise, we will be out of the game, and we can discuss forever whether it's 1 or 2 years more, because there won't be any pensions left.
Ich möchte doch noch gerne bei Herrn
But I'd like to put a question to Mr. Tanner. You didn't give a sign of the hand. You're not that optimistic? Well, basically, it's a matter of development. I think the contribution of aging people is still something in demand. Because we're always talking about the environment. The aging person itself has to take things in hand. And I'm not quite sure how sure I can be there and how well further training can progress with the present platforms. I'm not so sure. I don't have so many examples, but I had a person who was 69, very fit, and I wanted to send him to an Arabic country. I had all my papers. We went to a small restaurant for discussion. I didn't have enough room to put my papers, and this man was 69 years old. He took out his iPhone and he started to handle his iPhone, and he had all papers at hand, so to speak, on his iPhone. So I was really surprised. I don't have an iPhone, and this man worked with his iPhone very rapidly. Without further ado. And if this is possible, well, more people should be able to use these devices. In other words, the young Indians would find their match in aging people in Switzerland. But I'd like to take a break here because we have a very important topic, which is the healthcare system. I think there are great challenges we will have to deal with during the last years, and there will be more coming up. For instance, people who need care, financing care. You can consult statistics, and we'll find out that the last few months in the the life of a person are the most expensive ones, and this will not change if people live to an older age. What are we going to do about that? We have a scarcity of care. Mrs. Baumann pointed it out. We don't have enough healthcare personnel. We don't have enough money for healthcare. Now, what are we to do? Well, the most expensive months, they are more expensive not because a person is old, but we are talking about the last months before death, and this is where most costs are caused, whether you're old or young. Our problem is that we have been considering old age as an illness, because they're basically the person needs a lot of care. But if we have a look at statistics, this is not true. Old people are not really burdening the healthcare system as such. This is a prejudice. It's not true. In prevention, we have a lot of things to do in prevention, and we can, in order to save cost. Well, here I'm quite surprised. We've had studies claiming that older persons are a massive burden on healthcare, and actually health insurance should be more expensive for old people. Basically, you're both right. It's a very important point. If you look at earlier generations, for instance, Mrs. Fankhauser. Sorry, Mrs. Fankhauser. I am talking about this because we said this before. If you look at older generations, you have a relatively flat curve for additional cost in old age. This is a tough generation. This generation did not use everything that modern medicine has to offer. Now we find that every year, the culmination point of softening of generations is reached with my generation. Every year, older people need more healthcare. And we can actually demonstrate the fact that this is linked to the fact that they have more free time. To actually consume healthcare takes time. You can't do that when you're working, while you're working. And this is a problem. Standards have changed. Benefits that were considered extraordinary or not really accessible have become a basic right, a natural right, so to speak. Think about hip replacement or other joint replacement operations. This is not a risk that you have to be insured against. Everybody at one point reaches the point where you have to do it. In a way, it's like putting a spare part into a machine or exchanging a spare part. And then it is nearly impossible to pay these operations and that surgery within the existing system. Sorry, Mr. Held. I have to say something very evil now. In other words, you would like for people to more or less die while they're working. That would be the easiest thing. Well, no. You say that ironically. Sorry. It's very, very difficult to give an honest answer without being misunderstood. But I do think that it is a privilege to actually be able to die while you're working. Well, we mustn't look at things separately. Hip replacement can save cost socially within a society because the person remains mobile and needs less accompaniment later in life. But at this point, we have separate pots, so to speak. And this is why we have great problems at the interfaces. For instance, the health care is seldom, care for patients is seldom considered as one unit. Basically, the cost of healthcare will not increase the most pessimistic scenarios we had before did not come true, simply because there's a lot of potential. And it became clear that if older people, aging people, actually care for their own bodies, morbidity decreases rather than increasing. But it is true that more people survive, and therefore you need more healthcare personnel. And they consume more goods that come from the healthcare system. Where does enhancement medicine start, and where do we have real emergencies? Basically, we hide cost long term. However, we have some lucrative patients who can pay, and they certainly get a lot of care. Well, in other words, what you're saying is that chronically ill patients have a problem with healthcare? Well, yes, chronically ill persons have a problem with hidden benefits. I must say that I find it difficult when you say that politics are unable to solve these problems. And now we're talking about getting the economy into safeguarding the dignity of old age patients, as if it were a good. I must say that I have never, ever lived an occasion where somebody is simply bored and therefore goes to see his doctor. However, health has become a market. Have a look at publicity. I could put together everything I get during the year, all the offers I, as an old woman, get so that clinics and rehabilitation clinics can function. This is a part of economy. I fully agree with Mrs. Baumann when she said that we have to have a global look at healthcare. But what I live every day is the following. If old people want to actually organize self-help, the support of the active population equals zero. They don't take old people seriously. They don't. Well, if you have a look at 5 years, you look 5 years along your life, that's a lot when you're 75. And this is why I find that all actors of the health system and of the care system should check their positions. Old people, among themselves, could actually do a lot of things. They could organize a lot if they were supported and subsidized, possibly in the correct way. Well, give us an example. You were the president of a Swiss Association of Old People who want to organize self-help. Well, I'm talking about models like in my canton, Basel. We wanted to get old people together to organize a contact that would mean access for older people. Old age pensioners were the ones who had actually worked out the papers, the kind of forms that you would have to fill in order to be subsidized. But all that is simply put in the waste paper basket because communities were afraid that we would actually infringe on their competence and on their authority. Prevention and simple care for old people would have been available, would have been made available, but it didn't work so far. Maybe tomorrow these communities will switch on TV and see what they've missed out on. Well, dear communities in Basel-Land, have a look at what you've missed out on. Learn from it. Mr. Gärtner. Well, we talked about age and aging as a factor of increasing cost in the healthcare system. This is correct, and I don't want to call it into question. However, basically, the problem is that everybody claims more care, and there are technical possibilities that are made available simply because this is part of industry. I want to say this. Secondly, in fact, If you have a look at specific situations of aging people, you find that there are a lot of small factors that will make it possible for them to be autonomous or not. You sometimes have to make their apartments accessible, viable. And there I would say that the public sector should subsidize these activities to a certain degree. I think that with just in subsidizing just a little bit, we could actually reach a lot. Could the federal system do anything? Yes, it could. Basically, this is what we aim for. We want to identify good practices. We find out what is done where, what works. And then we introduce people to this. But sometimes the problem is that something is done and works, but neighboring communities don't even know about it. Well, I was surprised that when I looked at Social Security, that there is one, and then there's one department for children, youth, and aging questions. There's about 10 different chapters, and very few of them are actually there for old people. Don't you think that that is not enough? Well, if we have a look at the funds distribution, most funds go for old people. But Pro Senectute actually has a mandate from the Federation. We don't do it ourselves. This is an organization that has accumulated a lot of experience. Mr. Tanner wanted to ask for the floor earlier. Well, I would like to actually appeal to a sense of responsibility. Aging population expects a lot from the state and from its environment. And possibly it expects too much. They expect too much. I think that a sense of responsibility should be felt by aging people as well. I think if you have a look at the cycle of life, first of all, you're a good risk. This is what insurance companies consider. Then you're a medium risk, and then you're a bad risk, but you're still the same person. High risk, yes. Basically, you want a person to work until he's 55 years old, pay contributions, and then you want him to get out as fast as possible. Then he was a good risk. And there are differences between rural areas and the cities. Why? Simply because the offer of health care and medical care in cities is much better. In the countryside, in rural areas, premiums are lower, but health care is claimed less often. Neither is it as available as it is in cities. So basically, it is a fact that if there is a lot available via health insurance systems, it means that a lot of benefits are claimed. This is why I would appeal to a sense of responsibility of old age pensioners. He or she has to decide whether they actually want to claim certain services or not. I would like to give the floor to the public a little later. I would like to go around the panelists one more time. Basically, we wanted to determine where the problem lies, but I would like to talk about certain solutions. What approaches do we have? Last year, the Christian Party suggested increased premiums for health insurance for old age pensioners with better health care benefits. The Health Commission in the higher chamber of parliament decide that whoever is not in a managed care model, if somebody insists on choosing his or her own doctor, they will have to pay supplementary premiums. These are two different models, how to come to grips with increased costs. But I would like to know which are the right approaches. What kind of solutions do we have at hand? Well, in healthcare, we have an incentive system. Actually, you're not responsible yourself. If I go in a bakery, I can certainly decide what kind of bread I want to buy. But in healthcare, I'm told what I need and how much I can consume. Basically, we have a paradoxical incentive system. On one hand, the state wants to make profit. In other words, it will have to generate as many ill people as possible. On the other hand, it wants to save costs. The solution would be the following. At first, we would have to have a close look at a cost-benefit analysis. There you have to find out what added value a new treatment for cancer would actually bring. For instance, Me Too medication could possibly have increased benefits, but not always. You have to have a close look. And then the other question is that we actually have to set threshold values for cost-benefit. There you would actually ration care. Well, threshold values doesn't mean that you ration care for the single patient. Basically, you only decide how much do we want to afford. How much for additional benefit, for additional effect. Well, does that mean that you only get a hip replacement if it costs less than 5,000 francs? No. You will get hip replacement if the hip replacement surgery will actually bring what it promises. Further suggestions? Well, if proposals were that simple, we wouldn't even have to discuss it. But in my career as a politician, I have found out that these financial limits never amounted to what we actually wanted to get in. We had the deductibles first, but it didn't bring the desired results. The effectiveness of measures should be checked first. I think this is a better solution. Why are people treated or cared for in this or that way, and why not? But the public sector has actually withdrawn from healthcare, and that meant that costs shifted in hospital care from taxpayer to insured. We mustn't forget this. This can be proven by statistics. I would just simply say that a country that is actually able to afford out-transit tunnels could also afford hospital care. Well, if you had been playing an arena game, you would have scored 1 or 5 points now. But this discussion, the serious discussion, I would say that these comparisons are very problematic, because basically you can justify anything with them. You can always say that, well, we have money for this, therefore we also can afford something else. It's impossible in this discussion to come up with a real solution for the cost question in healthcare. But the fact that we can't keep going as we have been until now, that the burden on the healthcare system will not become unbearable by 2020, but much earlier, that households will have to be supported in order to make them able to pay the premiums. All that is true. Well, we should not say that the public sector would have to get into this and pay more. If we have a look at hospitals, we should say, no, the public sector cannot offer services and at the same time come up with subsidies. the public sector cantons have to withdraw from the system, and health insurance companies are the ones who have things under control. This absurd, the absurd number of hospitals, 6 times as many hospitals as we actually need in Switzerland, should be reduced, and then we would have better quality as well. Well, these are 2 completely different approaches, and I don't think that we could actually come to a solution or a compromise at this point. But now I would like to give the floor to the public. All the way at the back, you have a question? Microphone? My name is Margaret Negeli. I am a simple citizen, but I would like to hear more about old age pension homes. Old people are far too old. I would say that when you're 90, when you turn 90, you should simply draw a line. If you were able to live well until you're 90 years old, and if you were able to actually enjoy your old age pensioners' age, you should simply leave this world.
Ziemlich radikaler Vorschlag.
That's a bit radical. Just to have a cut-off point expressed in years is a bit of a problem. Mrs. Baumann? Well, this exactly pinpoints the problem, because we belittle age and undervalue it. And at some point, if we continue in this vein, this is exactly what will happen. And we have to avoid this. I really wanted to put a question and perhaps open up the discussion. This discussion about age should also be extended to the priorities that the state lays down. As far as I'm concerned, the state should give priority to the old citizens and also to the poor and the weak. Swisscom can be privatized. Electricity can be privatized and deregulated. The building of the tunnel through the Alps can be stopped. The motorways and the railways can no longer be financed, but I just want to make sure that respect for old age is preserved until the very last second of a person's life. Disabled children with trisomic disabled children are not even brought to life any longer. That already alleviates the health and social insurance systems, but we should not simply say, you cost too much, you are too old, we're just going to kill you off. I'd prefer to work until I'm 75 years old and have a life that is valued right to the very last breath. Well, that was a very, very moving appeal for more respect and respect for old age. Well, what you said at the end is that I want to work until I'm 75. For the sums to work, you don't have to work until you're 75. You could retire much earlier. What we're talking about is very small adjustments, raising the age of retirement from 65 to maybe 69, depending on the development of life expectancy. That's far below 75, and that wouldn't be a problem. We wouldn't have any problems anymore. The problem is that Mrs. Fankhauser has said that those who are asking for retirement age of 66 or 67 are attacking the social system. I think that if we maintain the current situation, that is what's going to undermine the social system. Yes, this is a very, very important appeal addressed to Bern and the administration in Bern. One should value age and also give it the appropriate weight and finance. Do you feel that this is being done in Bern, Mr. Gärtner? Well, you can say or ask who is the state? We are the state. All we have in Bern are our representatives. The people working in the administration are very loyal. They really implement what the citizens ask for. We also have our own opinions, of course. We have values, we implement them, and we're also willing to commit ourselves and to engage. My warning would be to the younger people here that they also have to assume their part, their role. François Höpfliger, who's a researcher in matters of age, has said that even though we have these demographic shifts and differences in generation, solidarity still works very well in Switzerland. Imam Ashafa has a question, and then there are some others who have asked for the floor, and then the lady.
Thank you very much. I think there is a comment and then a question. The comment is just in line with what Fankhauser have said about age. She said it is the period of freedom and solidarity for her. And in Africa, where I came from, we see old age as a period of wisdom. It is wisdom that go with those periods. And there's a lot of check and balance in life that practically she has experienced or he has experienced that need to be transferred into the coming generation, the younger one. And those opportunities in Africa, we make good use of it. And I feel in my experience in traveling across between Africa and Europe is that there is a disconnection between the significance of this age of wisdom, where I remember we just come out of Sudan, and my friend, Pastor Dr. James Movewie, he became 50. And at the age of 50, there is a surprise. There's an elder who is an Arab inside the vehicle. And when we get together, and he says, oh, we just had today's your birthday, and you are 50. Then he brought 2 gifts for him. The first gift is a walking stick. And this walking stick, he says, it is and then the second one is a cane, a sort of animal skin cane. He said the age of 50 for us as Arab is the age of wisdom. You have worked so hard, try and error, and you got to a very important part in life that you need to review and then transfer this knowledge. So with the walking stick, wherever you talk, people should listen when they see you with that walking stick. I said, So, and then he said, number 2, and you need to transfer the positivity in your life to the younger coming generations. And I feel what Baumann-Holzle have just talked about, how her children are taken care by her old parent, where they transfer wisdom to her. This is a meeting point. I don't know why in old Europe, the idea is a family idea where the old age become age of wisdom. And people surround her, the grandchildren go, the great-grandchildren go, and meet with her and then share life with her or he, share life with them. What happened in the history of Europe? When do you have this disconnection to become the old age become age of burden that need to be thrown into dustbin? Thank you very much.
Danke vielmals. Also ein glühendes.
Thank you very much. A very heartfelt appeal to see old age as a time of wisdom, which is something that is quite common in Africa. So the question here is, what has happened in old Europe, that this no longer works? Mr. Tanay. I'm not saying that it's not present at all anymore, that it's not working anymore. There are all sorts of areas, and there are also many companies that practice this. I'm taking examples from the economy, from the economic sector. They make use of the experience of the older and use it to train the younger, support the younger generation. This helps companies to be more competitive. It's a competitive edge. A company can develop much more faster by tapping into the experience of older employees. There are some industrial sectors that are doing this very intensively. For example, in the energy sector, the building of turbines, for example, there you need a lot of knowledge, engineering knowledge, and there are a certain number, quite many older engineers, some of them all retired, who assist the younger engineers part-time. That's a positive example then. Thank you very much, Mrs. Fankhauser. I'd also like to give you two examples which do not take place within companies. For example, the Grey Panthers, who help teachers at school. This is also transfer of knowledge. And then there's a whole mentoring system in politics or in job searching or in helping apprentices in companies. There are many models that have been supported also by Pro Senectute. I'm really worried about the fact that we are only thinking and talking about the economic aspects of the various phases of age. So I'm delighted to have to hear that in other cultures and civilizations, matters are completely different. I know that in some continents and parts of the world, we have, in inverted commas, too many young people, and one could also talk about the fact that the young have no outlook, no prospects at all, in the same way as we, the older generation, here in Europe, don't have any prospects either, and there's no kind of interface between the generations. Here, a young man on the right.
You said that
Sie haben gesagt,
be a good solution for this problem, but it seems to me, isn't it just a short-run solution? Because in Switzerland, fertility. Hello, yeah. So yeah, I don't know when it went out. Yeah, you said that raising the retirement age would be a good solution, but isn't this just a short-run solution? Because in Switzerland, the fertility rate is so much lower than what it would need to be to maintain a stable population that, in fact, if you look at the pyramid of ages, it's exponentially, there will always be a disproportion between the old people and the young people, and this will increase, this disproportion, this discrepancy will increase exponentially as long as the fertility rate is so much lower. And without migration, I think we would already have this wall upon us. And what can we do to with respect to this?
Okay, Thomas Held.
Well, in the short run, I mean, talking about 10 or 20 years, we can't do anything because the people who are born, and the ones who haven't been born. So this doesn't change. And you are completely right with regard to the immigration factor as one of the key elements that contributed to the relative resilience of the Swiss social security system. I think that the idea to influence by state actions the fertility rate is very problematic. It's almost impossible. But on the other hand, you can see in history that fertility rates have swung back, have changed. And it is not completely impossible that at one point the fertility rate would come back again. And I think that this doesn't do anything to address the imminent problem with regard to the stability of the social security system. And let me add one point. In this debate, we are not talking about utopia. It's not inventing a completely new social security system. It's rather, the starting point is rather that we think in Switzerland with those three pillars, we have historically something that has developed in a very good way. And all proposals, and that's why I disagree sometimes with Frau Fankhauser, that all proposals are aimed at stabilizing these pillars. And if one of these pillars, for example, the AHV, which is the pay-as-you-go part, breaks away, or when the second pillar breaks away, we have a real problem, and all these guarantees and all these promises for the good life after in old age will also be in danger.
Danke. Also die Geburtenrate ist
Thank you. The birth rate, it is true, has stopped sinking as it did for many years, but is now on a slight rise. I remember that Mr. Kuschba, about 7 years ago, spoke in favor of retirement age of 67 and appealed to the population to have more babies, and I think he was more successful regarding babies than retirement age. Yes, but these babies too will be old one day. We won't, of course, experience that anymore, and we don't know whether they will need to have even more babies so that the system can be financed. So these ups and downs of birth rates are really a mystery. Now, someone said that one should finance the social security and retirement systems in terms of 50-year cycles. Maybe one should do the same for the old age pension system. Would you like to draw lots to see who will get to put the question? Okay, decided. Off you go.
My name is Yuna Cho, and I'm from International School of Geneva, and I want to direct one question to Mr. Held. I completely agree with the Mr. who just spoke that old age is age of wisdom and age of competitiveness, because I'm from the similar culture where old age is also respected. But I also have a question, because in some part of Asia, for example in China, the state pension is not required, it's not secured. Therefore, there's a conflict between the older generation who want to retire and who doesn't want to retire, because retirement might mean beginning of the poverty. And on the other hand, there is an increasing rate of youth unemployment, so there's a conflict going on inside the society. And our ultimate goal is to raise the standard of living. So what do you think about this issue?
Well, I'm not an expert in Asian economics, but as I understand the system, it's still very much based on self-reliance, on the family as a group, and there is much intergenerational transfers from the younger generation to the old, because there is no social security net in the way that you would find it in Europe. And I think that if this is an important element of the Asian culture, one should try to preserve it, because replacing it by a European-type welfare state would probably not be the best idea for the future.
Okay, thank you. Weitere Fragen?
Any further questions? A young gentleman over here.
Okay. Hello. Okay, you have mentioned.
Guten Tag. Sie haben erwähnt, dass wir jetzt ein 20-Jahre-Fenster haben. Da hat man Ressourcen und da kann man etwas beitragen zur Welt. Aber wie ist das mit Kindern, die eben nicht Eltern haben?
Adopt a little kid.
Ich habe leider nicht
Das habe ich jetzt auch nicht ganz verstanden. Hat Thomas Held, haben Sie?
verstanden.
Could you just say it again? We didn't understand it, please.
Okay, so nowadays, your generation that it has a 20 years window, you have resources, and there is in the other side of the world, third world countries where children don't have opportunities. Maybe their parents cannot afford a better living for them. or maybe they don't have parents. Would you like to adopt these children who have a better opportunity here?
No, yeah, okay. No, may I? No, go ahead.
Okay, no, it's okay. Yeah.
Aha, okay. Also, die Antwort auf Deutsch.
I'll answer in German. You are touching upon a very important point. Basically, that was the idea of financing old age pension with investments. That is, say, to save so that later on you can live off the interest that you earn from this investment. But you can, of course, only do this in this world if this money is invested in the world. So you would help children in those parts of the world by investing in their countries, not by adopting them, by transferring them from their birth country somewhere else. That is the advantage of our system. Instead of having an old age retirement system, you invest in various countries so that you can also save. You can invest in shares, in bonds, in real estate, in different objects. Maybe it's not understood well enough. This is an opportunity. It's a great opportunity to also boost development in other parts of the world. But it can only work if the money that is invested can also be benefited from by society. What we've noticed in the current crisis is that the money which has been invested does not benefit all of society in the same way. So this is just a question of global justice and equity, which is a very important question and a burning one. Well, I hope that here in Davos some answers will be found to this question. I think we have guests here from other parts of the world. I would like to point out that this crisis in the so-called emerging countries in Asia, in the Middle East, and in other parts of the world, these emerging countries have been less hard hit by the crisis than industrialized countries. Now that we are only recovering from the crisis, the other emerging countries have overtaken us, and that's why we have all these posters of India, youth and talent, which are not to be found here in Switzerland or in Europe or industrialized countries, but elsewhere, as in India. Thank you. Next question.
Das Mikrofon ist unterwegs. Einfach mal reinreden, das geht dann gut.
Ich möchte Herrn Held nur entgegnen, dass jetzt das.
Well, Mr. Held has just spoken about this in a very relative terms. He's saying that the emerging markets have recovered better than our industrialized countries. That is not quite true, because in absolute terms, the emerging markets have definitely suffered more from the crisis than we have.
Okay, ich glaube, das können wir einfach mal so stehen.
Okay, well, that was just a statement. We are actually talking about a different subject here. One more question here in the front rows. I have a question to all the panelists. Perhaps Mr. Held is most suited to answer this question because he was very militant in 1968 and that movement, and he knows that there's a new generation of older people. So what do politicians want to do with this new generation of older people who will not simply obey? I don't want anyone to tell me when I have to die. I want to decide that myself. And I don't want anyone to restrict Exit, the organization that helps old people to die, even more.
So, mit Ausnahme dieser ersten Frage.
I don't think anyone here has spoken about statutory age limitation or questioned what you have just mentioned. Well, in Switzerland, there should be a new regulation. A new regulation should be introduced to aiding people who want to die, says the moderator. Well, we're talking about this greedy generation that has had everything. First of all, this generation was one of the first to have good training and education. There were no wars, and were no serious crises until this recent one. And isn't really affected by the worry of no guarantees or the guarantees of social security not being available. It's a generation that enjoys life, and I can speak from my own experience. Justice is, of course, a very big concept, and you have to use it as a word very carefully. But when you look at the distribution and sharing between generations, the generation of 1968 really had all the assets on its side, but has not really shared it with the younger generation. And that's why I am so committed to doing something, even to my own disadvantage, to make sure that the pensions are reduced and retirement age is increased, because I think there's an absolute need for such distribution. Mr. Gärtner? Well, it's the same answer I already gave earlier on. When one says, who is the state? Well, you are, we are. The generation of 1968 is a very populous generation. There are very many born in or of that generation. Now, if as many of the 68 generation act like you do, I think we'd be in a much better situation. I'd like to summarize, make one comment, which is a personal one, and put a question to you. Perhaps you could tell me how you see your life when you'll be 80, Mr. Tanner. Well, if I'm still alive when I'm 80, I would still like to be doing things or one thing. I live in the Engadin, not very far from here. I have a lot of nature surrounding me. And I think growing old should be should show a good balance of physical fitness and intellectual agility. I want to be fit enough to go on hikes. I would like to go on coaching. I know that my experience can help others. Others can benefit from my experience, and I would like to pass my experience on. That is a target for me. Well, I hope that you'll be able to do that, Mrs. Baumann-Hölzle. What about you? I have similar hopes and wishes as Mr. Tano. I'm sure that I will still be active in all sorts of areas. And if my children have children, if I have grandchildren, I and my husband will certainly help my children to look after their children, look after my own grandchildren. And because I belong to this generation, to this very privileged sector of people who are well trained, have a good education, I want to give something back to society based on this idea of solidarity. Mr. Held? Yes, indeed. Return something to society, and that can take the form of not having to need too much care or transfer. And that's something I already said at the beginning of the discussion. Mrs. Fankhauser? Well, for me, 80 is not that far away. In 6 years' time, I'll be 80. And I just hope that society will understand that solidarity is not a question of age, but between the rich and the poor and the sick and the healthy, regardless of age. I am very humble And obviously, dependency on care does not depend entirely on me. I will try and influence it as much as possible, and I hope I'll be as patient as possible to bear what will need to be borne. Mr. Gärtner? Well, I won't be working, won't have a job anymore, formally anyway, but I hope that I'll have a social network that will support me, children, maybe grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and neighbors who will all be involved in this system of give and take, whether it's care, services, or talks. Thank you very much. I'd just like to remind you that we have 2 more podia this afternoon, 3 o'clock, 3:30, Yes We Can, and 7 o'clock, A World Without Nuclear Weapons, Utopia. Thank you very much to all participants.